know security is hard, so let's assume we're probably gonna get pwned by noon. But if we all start to get the basics right, we might not fully get pwned until tonight. All right, there we go. We're live. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 7-Minute Security live stream. My name is Brian Johnson with 7-Minute Security, and joined by our friend Amanda Berlin from Blumira. How's it going, Amanda?
Wonderful. Thank you for having me on again.
And I'm super excited for this. I know you're going to be teaching us how to be Sysmon senseis, and so I'm mainly going to play the role of the annoying. I don't want to say people at conferences are annoying. Sometimes there can be a person in the audience that derails the conversation with like personal anecdotes and stuff. I'm not going to be that guy, but I definitely love this topic. I don't know a lot about it, so I will be the guy that's like, oh, but what about this? And but you only have to put up with me for, this time we have together. But I'm excited I'll have you, do a more in-depth interview and talk about the cool things you do at Blumira. The only semi-annoying self-promotion I just wanted to mention is that we have let me see, I might even have like a little graphic for it. And I totally don't. So we've got our light pen testing class coming up Tuesday through Thursday, the 19th through 21st of this month, which is really cool. Actually, I think I mentioned this to you, Amanda, but we have this pen test lab that people RDP into like their own student workstation. And for 3 half days, all we do is just kind of hack it to pieces, just enumerate Active Directory, password spray, curb roast, AS rep roast, all the roasting, all those sorts of things. And then at the very last day, there's a little time left over and we just sort of talk about whatever the students want to talk about. And inevitably the conversation goes to, how the heck do I detect any of this stuff? And as sort of like a cheesy infomercial, I let them know like, hey, behind the scenes this whole time, I've had Blumira running and looking at all the logs and alerting on the things. And I actually pop open the dashboard and I just kind of show them, that how important it is to detect these things. And I emphasize that what we're doing should be pretty quote unquote loud from a defender standpoint. And companies should be able to see that like this enumeration is happening, but often we just fly right under the radar. We finish our test, we get all the hashes, we get all the sensitive data, and it's over. But it's nice. I really like when I can kind of nudge folks your way. But yeah, would you just do a little introduction? Tell us about the cool things you do at Blumira, and then I'll just let you take us through becoming a Sysmon sensei.
Sure. So I lead the incident detection engineering team. So there's me and 3 other wonderful people that get to create detections, and we'll see some of those in this presentation. And the ones that you're kind of talking about in your class, it's interesting. I think one of these times maybe we should talk dissect some of those detections and talk about how some of them work and some of the more challenging things that we get into when trying to detect bad stuff. I think that would be kind of cool. So yeah, that's what I do on a day-to-day basis. I do things like this too. So kind of talking about the research and the detections that we make, and just doing our best to help small, medium businesses just get better at security, because a lot of times they're running on a shoestring budget and not very lean teams. So that's kind of our passion, is to help the smaller orgs out there get a little bit better quicker.
And one thing I really like that you do, outside of the really fun kind of nerdy conversations I've been able to have with you and some of your teammates, is like when it comes to a lot of these detections for things that go under the radar, like the roasting attacks we were talking about. It's really nice that you've been very transparent and published some PowerShell scripts, published some articles like, this is how you turn the logging up. This is how you detect a lot of these early warning signs of badness. And it's been,
Right.
I love that attitude just in general in security, when people are just like, hey, it's not secret squirrel sauce. Like, we're going to show you how we came up with this. but it's also I'll be honest with you, it's been a little bit egg in face unintentionally with some of the post-mortem pen test calls I've had where they bring on their managed service provider and we talk through the pen test, and sometimes it'll be like that vendor will say, "Well, curb roasting, it's very complicated, Brian," and they secure explain why I don't know what I'm talking about, and that this is so hard to detect, nobody can do it. And then I can literally paste in the chat, "Well, here's this Blumira article that Amanda wrote or somebody wrote, right, about you know
You
the
can do it.
exactly, and shared it in some cases with you, like a PowerShell script
Mhm.
to create a Honey account or whatever. And so that's really shut down some conversations because I don't know the inner workings of ones and zeros of these Kerberos things, but it's nice because it's like I don't have to. I can just go. Well, it may be it may be a mystery, but somebody figured it out, and then they kind of change their tune and they backpedal and they kind of habita habita habita, and try to save face, and I can just kind of sit there and let them struggle just a little bit. So thank you
Yeah.
to you and your teams for what you do. It's really insightful
Yeah.
information.
It's a lot of fun because you don't, I mean, of course, working at Blumira, I would always want people to come and use us as a solution, but that
Yeah,
shouldn't be like the you shouldn't gatekeep that information just because they can't or don't want to use you as a solution. Like, no, go do this with whoever you want to. I don't care. Just the
yeah,
more you can detect, the better.
yeah, yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's
So
that's great. And with Sysmon, which is what we're talking about. I mean, isn't it the case? I don't tell me if I'm way off base here, but it seems like of the other security solutions that are out there, whether open source or commercial, I believe Sysmon is like a common bolt in that infrastructure that kind of turns up the verbosity of logging, right? But then you can go crazy with how you slice and dice that information. But it seems like any agent I've installed in the lab, as part of that install, it's like, well, let me go grab Sysmon so we can get good
mhm.
logging, and then they layer whatever else on top of it. But it's some speaking to the secret squirrel stuff, a lot of companies are just so don't look behind the curtain. We do things wizardry you've never heard of, and I just automatically think
Yeah.
I bet Sysmon is a backbone chunk to whatever it is that you're doing. So let's just talk about it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, and I love it because it's free. So that's always one of the things that I point out just because, like I said, a lot of people are running on shoestring budgets. So,
Yeah,
um, yeah. So yeah, let's go ahead and kind of dive into it.
yeah,
I like this first one just because it's very mesmerizing. I could watch the screen all day. It's just
yeah, yeah. What
very
is that?
calming.
What? Because you use
I don't know.
Keynote, right? We joked about before this
Yeah.
that anytime you said you send people a key file and they're like, hold on, is this a crypto situation? Is this a
Yeah.
SSH key? What did you send me? But is this like a feature of Keynote? I don't want to derail us, but
I
I haven't
don't
heard of this.
remember. I don't
Okay.
remember. I feel like this is like one of the things that you can use as an image, like a background image. And I just found it. I'm like, oh, this is perfect. I'm going to use this everywhere.
Okay. It is. It's very soothing. I'm
Yeah,
comfortable.
yeah,
I'm ready.
yeah. All right. So, this is a very interesting way to start a presentation out, right? This is a company that we had helped a while back. So I created this presentation about a year and a half ago and have updated it with random things since. But this is a company that had contacted us, and this is a splash screen that they had gotten. I'm sure, people listening or watching have either heard stories of this or probably dealt with stories like this. But, ransomware splash screen comes up on the server, and, they contact us. It's actually not the first thing that they saw. They didn't actually know that their endpoint was ransomed at the time. They ended up finding these notes, but the first thing that they actually saw was a PS exec command run internally on their network. Now they didn't have any Sysmon installed, and we'll see why that's important in a little bit.
Mhm.
So they didn't have Sysmon installed. They weren't sending us endpoint agent logs. For some reason, their domain controller had stopped sending us logs. Um, And it wouldn't have mattered if they were sending us endpoint agents anyways, because all of their servers that were hit didn't have the endpoint agent on it anyway. And the password that they had used for their domain admin credentials was the same username and password that was their admin on their public facing VPN login. So this was a very fluid attack. Just a lot of things bad happened at once. And they had their Exchange server ransomware. I thought it was nice. Yeah, I thought it was nice that they said that if they contacted them quickly, they'd give them a discount. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases where they did have to pay the ransom, because not only was their entire email server compromised and ransomed, they had no backups. And this was like a food service industry place, and they needed that information. They just didn't have a way to, they weighed their risks, right? Like sometimes you just have to bite the bullet and pay the ransom and hope that you will get your data back. And usually ransomware actors, from what I've seen, follow through on those promises, just because it's a business for them too, even though it's a very morally terrible one. But if they, screw over too many people, nobody's going to pay them anymore, right? So the better their business practices are from that standpoint, the better for them in the long run. So they were able to get their data back after paying that stuff, but sadly, that's kind of the way that it went. The only reason we got that ps exec command eventually anyways, and they were able to lock them out and contact an IR firm, is because they did have one device with Sysmon on it already, and that was sending us logs. But it was like way further in the process. Like, you don't want somebody already inside your network running psexec commands internally,
Yeah.
as a first notification.
Yeah, exactly.
So this is the definition of Sysmon. It's part of the sysinternal suites that came out in 2014 that Microsoft owns. It was written in part by Mark Rosanovich, and we were just talking about him a little bit before this started, but he's still an active member of Microsoft and works on Sysmon and stuff. And before, when Sysmon came out, the AV products around that time were all just like signature based. So triggering on file hashes or names of files or certain directories or stuff like that. There was no real like we have now, which is more like the next gen antivirus type stuff that looks for actual, this process spawned this process and that kind of stuff. Sysmon gives us way more logging than what just comes with Windows. I know it's a Windows product, but if you look at any Windows or Windows Server or Windows Active Directory logs that come turned on by default, there aren't many.
Right.
Like even on the left-hand side, like the things that EventVR can detect, like process creation, for example, process change, those aren't on by default. You have to go in and either set them with your policy or configure something to turn these on. And then like DNS queries, if anybody has ever tried to capture DNS debug logging on a Windows like DNS server, it is extremely painful. It is, you did not get the information that you need. It's not helpful in any kind of IR situation to try and go through that process, or at least that I've seen. It's much, much easier to just install Sysmon and configure it. Now, kind of at the end of this presentation, I'll go in through some of the configuration options, but we'll also see pieces and parts of those as we go through some of the use cases. There's one that you can, because it's a one-liner, right, to install Sysmon. You run the install, you accept the EULA, and you point to configuration file. It's really super easy to install. That configuration file, though, is a big part of it, because you can add so much to the logs, even manually. through rules and through that configuration. So that's really super nice.
Does Blumira have their own? I see a lot of GitHub projects that have. In fact, it's it's the Swift-bound security one that I've always kind of looked at as
Mhm.
standard. Does Blumira have their own, or do you have one for just the average uh, person that's like, hey, I want a good rule or a good XML file to point to that because I don't know how to build my own. Do you have a favorite?
Right. So we used to always point to Swift on security, and that's a good like starting one. But
Okay.
there's another one by Olaf Hartong that is the Sysmon modular config, and it
Hmm.
actually allows you to turn on and off complete sections depending on your environment, and it also ties everything to MITRE. So
Okay.
we'll see that in like one of the use cases I have. It'll show you like the little additions that configuration file kind of adds to the Sysmon event IDs.
Okay. Hey,
But
and
yeah,
I'm sorry, if you don't mind, I'll pepper in. It's been great. A lot of questions have already come in, and
okay.
one of just and I can highlight this, so I think you should be able to see it. Our friend Jeff asked about if you know of any organizations using newer preventative controls in Sysmon. I am not super up to date on it, so I haven't seen if it's got new bells and whistles. But did that show
This
up
is
for you? His question.
no, I can't see it. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. He says
But
he says, "Do you know of many organizations using the newer preventative controls in Sysmon? For example, if I recall, Sysmon can now block creation of new EXEs under app data folders." Oh, so kind of a little bit of an app locker
yeah,
type of
right.
behavior? That sounds
Yeah, yeah,
sweet.
yeah.
I gotta play with that.
I know a lot of the companies that we deal with have I don't want to say immature security programs, but they don't have the staff to maintain something like that that
Oh, right.
is doing that. So I've not seen many yet, but I've heard of a few that have used it in specific use cases, and it seems to do well.
Okay.
The one that was the one on the bottom on here that I have as file delete detected was an interesting one when they added it to Sysmon
Oh,
because
yeah.
you have that one, but then you also have the file delete archived above that. So that was interesting because it was actually filling up people's hard drives, because if somebody deleted a file, it would archive that file and not actually delete it.
Oh, okay.
And so that one was kind of dangerous.
Yeah, you wanna be careful with that one.
Yeah, yeah.
And in
Yeah,
general,
so
too, we should say as far as Sysmon, just cautionary tales a little bit, right? Is if you get Sysmon and a nice config file rocking on a system, if you've got an older non SSD hard drive, I've seen that thing buckle to its knees,
oh, yeah.
trying to write all those events and stuff. So definitely want
Oh,
to
yeah.
like test before you decide to just go. This is great. Let's turn it on everywhere because a lot of customers we work with anyway still they try to maximize life out of their workstations and laptops, and some of them still have a little bit of older rusty crusty hard drives.
Yeah, definitely pay attention to the minimum specs.
Yeah, yeah.
And, yeah, I've seen the same thing where, your performance kind of is degraded on the older machines that don't have enough, um, doesn't have a hard enough, uh, fast enough hard drive, definitely. So here we're just gonna go over use case number 1. So I have 3 different use cases in here that go over things that you can detect, and I'll show the detections as well. And then at the end, I have like a compromise that I'll go into that another customer had around the proxy logon, proxy shell stuff around Exchange that we've seen a ton of this year. So this first one, I'm sure you can vouch to this, Brian, is dumping LSAS
Mhm.
using different things, right? Like you can dump your LSAS using com services, you can do it with Mimikatz, you can do it with Task Manager. There's a handful of ways to dump process memory off of a host. Um, I've never seen this be a false positive. Nobody should be just dumping past like LSAS at all, unless it's malicious or testing something. There
Okay.
are there are products out there that do sketchy things in the background, but I've never seen this one be a false positive. So this is the one of the ones that we classify as a priority one threat.
And just if folks, anybody's watching who's not familiar or wouldn't know why someone would want to do this, if you're able to pull this off and dump process memory on a pen test, whether it's on a workstation or a server, often inside of that dump will be plain text and or hashed credentials of ideally privileged users, so you can instantly get yourself in the highest echelon of permissions and be a domain admin and get right to the strike at the heart of Active Directory. So it's great when, like Amanda said, you can detect it, because things like that, curb roasting, some of these other things. Well, I think you mention on the past webinar we had, you have seen some security and IT software emulate some things, like maybe the roasting attack or pass the
Pass
hash attacks,
pass
maybe.
the hash.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
pass the hash attacks. There are several well-known vendors that do like Active Directory management and like other user group management stuff and there's some RMMs out there that are doing pass the hash on the background, and we've had to create custom detections and filters for people to ignore like their RMM exes, which is very terrible.
Yeah, that makes me feel all sorts of uncomfortable. But anyway, we can.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna do a whole talk, I think, once about just like how bad tools are acting like attackers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but what a nice little value add though too, almost, right, to install a system like Blumira of just in the realm of discovery, of just maybe
Oh
finding
yeah,
out if you've got tools that are doing weird stuff
oh
behind
yeah.
the
It
scenes.
gives you so much visibility when you have something showing you those logs that you just never in a million years would have imagined were happening on an endpoint, which is interesting.
Yeah, certainly.
Um, So here you can kind of see the full command that's run when you want to do this. So like if you wanted to, you could run this in test and see if whatever you're using, if you have a SIM, can detect something like this. It's a pretty easy command to run, right? So you have the
Yeah.
run DLL32, com services DLL, the command mini dump. I can't remember what 480 is for. So the process ID,
Yep, I believe so. Yep, of
yeah.
LSAS, I think so.
Um, yeah, and then you are just saying where you want to save it to, and then saying that you want a full dump file.
Yeah.
And yeah, anything like that should probably be detected on. I can kind of show you that um, in the next slide. But this one kind of goes over the difference between what you see in Windows and what you see in Sysmon. So on the left-hand
Jeez.
side, it's a big difference, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
4688, and I did a webinar a while back with Carlos, uh, blank on his last name.
From,
Um,
Trusted Sec? Is it
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Chris?
and yeah, Carlos Perez, and he is amazing at Sysmon. I followed his work for a very, very long time, and we kind of talked about it a little bit. Just because you're installing Sysmon doesn't mean you don't detect on the Windows stuff also, right? If you can
Oh,
detect
okay.
on both, do it, right? Like
Okay,
it gives you
gotcha.
so much more visibility because if Sysmon isn't installed on something, or if something happens with a GPO and you're not getting 4688, it's always good to have that coverage. So if it's possible, detect on both things, but you can tell, I mean, Sysmon's just giving you so much more information about the thing that actually happened. Like for example, like if you look about three-quarters of the way down, it'll tell you like my terminal session ID. So it shows you that when I did this, I was logged in over RDP,
Oh. Oh,
right?
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, it gives you the hashes. It gives you more of the UIDs, the actual parent process ID there. There's just so much more information that it will give you. And kind of what I was talking about earlier, the second line under process create on the right is the rule name. So that's the rule name that actually comes from that Sysmon modular config file, right?
Oh,
It
gotcha. Oh, that's a
looks,
MITRE? That's a MITRE number?
yeah, mm-hmm,
Oh, and that's built
yeah.
that's that relationship tying is right in Sysmon, or does
In the
that come from that
config.
XML? Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's from that config file.
oh, very cool.
Yeah, so you
Very
could,
cool.
if you want to learn how to write sysmon config rules inside that XML, you can do that and even add stuff to your own sysmon event IDs if you want for your own things that might happen, right? It could be, I don't know, something with like your specific software or a specific account or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's real interesting because you can kind of customize what you're getting out of Event Viewer
Oh,
when you can modify those kind of things.
nice.
And then that's this blown up a little bit. So the top two, the one is where you see it in Windows Event Viewer. The second one is that part of the Sysmon modular config. So that's the process creation part, and it shows, all right, it's giving the original file name as the run DLL32 exe, and it's attaching that name to it. And it's under the native Windows tools living off the land portion of it.
Yeah.
And then the bottom is the actual Atomic Red Team tool, like script that they have. So the Red Canary has all the Atomic Red Team tests, and it will show you kind of how to generate that detection if you want, or generate that log, which we use Atomic Red Team stuff all the time, just to test our detections. So
Yeah,
it kind of
that's
ties into that technique.
just drop a link to that. I did the Atomic Red Team. I used that it was maybe a couple years ago, but it was a customer that was evaluating a couple of different EDR solutions, and a couple were like brand name and then a couple were like I'd never heard of. And it was nice to just well, what I wanted to do was kind of run them all through a standard set of tests, and I was kind of thinking about my own. And then yeah, a coworker was like, "Don't do that. Just run them through, all or at least a subset of red team, and just
Right.
that'll emulate the real bad stuff and give you an idea of if it's worth the dollars or not." So yeah,
Yeah,
that's
for
super sweet.
sure. And then this is the detection summary. So Windows Event ID 1, and then if you look at for the command or the parent command, to have that comm services or mini dump in it. And those, the percent symbols are like if you're using the like operator, and it's different for every search platform, sim, database, language, like whatever you plan on using. That's just saying if it has comm services, some other stuff, and then mini dump in it, that's what you're supposed to be
Oh,
looking for.
gotcha. Yeah, right. These are the important things. Any combination, but if we see those two, we're gonna
Yeah,
sound
yeah,
the alarm. Okay,
yep.
neat.
All right, so then we're on to use case number two, which is another bad one, which is not
Yeah.
just capturing credentials in the memory on one host. This is actually dumping your entire Active Directory database with NTDS util. So NTDS util, if anybody is not familiar, is a tool that is built into Windows that you can use to manage your NTDS instance, which is basically like Active Directory and stuff. It lets you manage the database that Active Directory uses called ntds.dit, and this will actually dump that entire database using a specific command. And we can, go ahead. You can see that
Oh,
right
yeah, I
there.
was just gonna say from a pen test point of view, you'll see, pen testers or attackers, they'll use things like crack map exec or secrets dump,
Mm-hmm.
which I know there's 70 different ways, right, to actually do the dump. But I do see a lot of attackers, and I myself on a pen test now, because those other third-party tools have been a little shaky and/or crashed domain controllers in some instances. If I get a high privileged account, I usually just RDP right into the domain controller, and I run exactly what's on the screen to just do things the quote unquote Microsoft way. And then it's
Right.
makes this nice little tidy DC backup folder for me. And I just take that and run with it. So yeah, at a minimum, it'd be so great if everybody could detect if that happens, because I think an attacker trying to go stealthy is just, going to try to do it in a way that doesn't sound alarms, that doesn't run malicious code or some exe that's going to like bypass EDR. It's like, let's just use what let's live off the land and let's run what Microsoft has given us. But yeah, and that is something I've seen in environments where there is backup software and stuff that is doing that in the background, which is good if they are backing up the database. But I'd certainly want to know when and where it's happening, whether it's
Oh,
good
sure.
or evil. But that's just me.
Yeah, because that's very important information, right?
Yeah,
That is every relationship, every user account, every group. That is your Active Directory. So sure, people use that to create legitimate backups.
yeah,
But again, yeah, like you said, you're still going to want to know when that's happening, and that's an important thing to track. But yeah, this is one that we actually saw at a legitimate customer that triggered and that actually caught it. So the difference in between those for Linux and Windows and Sysmon are this: um, when you only have Windows, you're only going to see Windows Event ID 4799, which is just local group memberships being enumerated, which is how Active Directory works. You don't
yep, yep.
you enumerate accounts all the time. Like that is literally Active Directory is doing that constantly, legitimately, all the time. So you can't really trigger off of just enumeration of accounts. It's really difficult to go based just on that. But then with Sysmon, you have the three on the right hand side here, which are process creation, process access, and a registry value being set. So that first one we kind of saw a little bit already. Here again, you can see that as in a terminal session. It's my account. It shows the command line that I ran, the hashes. It shows that I ran it through PowerShell ICE, and I didn't just do it through a bash file or something like that.
Yeah.
So that gives you more information too.
That's awesome. I love that I wasn't thinking about that terminal ID or session ID could be so helpful to maybe show you, yeah, what like environment were they in when they did it and what account did the dumping. I mean, that would at least maybe
Right?
give you some breadcrumbs of like, oh, it's this account that got compromised, and maybe you can, forensically at least figure something out rather than just, yeah, page through. It looks like the
Yeah.
timestamps on the left side are just, it looks like a bajillion things happened at is that
Yes.
151, right? It's like, how would you ever
Yes.
go through and try to find the bad in that? I just don't
Oh yeah.
you can.
Like you could count all of them, but it's happening all the time anyways.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Uh, and then this is process being accessed. So this is that NTDS util accessing the actual memory. Like it shows you where it granted access at in the memory, and it shows you kind of what's going on inside there. So that can be helpful also to kind of show you, oh my gosh, like it's doing something here with NTDS util.
Yeah.
And then the registry value being set when that backup completes, this registry value is set. So it shows you where that target image is, and just the fact that it completed is when that's set during that command.
And I'm just thinking again too, even outside of security, if you have this happening at all, it's good to know. We had a pen test not that long ago where the admins weren't aware that there was a PowerShell script running in the background every day. Had
Oh
had
yeah.
had creds hard coded into it, but it was dumping to like, C:\temp DC or something. But they had shared that folder out with too much permission, and so we found that in our sweep of
Oh,
SSD shares, and it's like, oh
okay.
hello, we'll just rip NTDS right out of that backup. I mean, we triggered nothing and got to everything. So
Oh
there's
wow.
yet another more IT best practices thing where you just want to know, yeah, who's taking these snapshots and ultimately where are they going?
Oh yeah.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah. This next one, I'll cover some PowerShell stuff. That's my favorite.
Oh yeah.
Is
Yeah,
digging into people's environments and all the crazy PowerShell stuff that's being run.
sure.
Um, and then this is what this use case looks like. It's another Windows Event ID one. This is just like one example of what we could do based off of those other three. And then this is when you're looking for a process name that's like NTDS util, And then the QQ at the end is very common for that to be quitting out both of the commands in that whole one line dump file.
Right.
All right, so then use case 3 is using ComSpec. So ComSpec is an environment variable in Microsoft that is interpreted as CMD.exe. So a lot of people will try and get around being detected by using ComSpec instead of using the command line. So you can see on the bottom right-hand side, if you just echo, I just forget those, percent ComSpec percent, it'll come back and say it's just, CMD.exe.
Oh, interesting. Okay, I don't think I've used this one too much. This is kind of fascinating.
Yeah, you should try it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so this is the command that was, go back a little bit. This is the command that was run, right? So ComSpec/b/c start. It's using the command line to start PowerShell with no profile hidden with an encoded command.
Oh, okay. So something
So
ugly could be in there.
yeah, right. So with that encoded command, so we'll come back to this. I think we come back to this one. No, hold on. Okay, no, here it is. So this this encoded command that was run. I'm trying to think because I don't have my notes. Oh no, all right. So this is a sidebar. We'll come back to the encoded command that we just showed you in the last slide in a second. But the thing was, I was looking for examples for this talk and came across this. And this was an actual, they had used ComSpec and this was the encoded command. And I was really starting to get worried because you see, like, if you look at system text encoding, Unicode, get string, it's all obfuscated. So it's all upper lowercase and it looks like, the SpongeBob meme is saying it.
Right on.
Right. And usually that means something bad is happening, right? When somebody tries to obfuscate that, they're trying to get around detection by assuming that you're not looking for something that's case insensitive. So I took that and I decoded it. I did because they're all like base 64 encoded. So I decoded it. And this was Matt Graver's reflection method, which
Oh,
is an AMSI bypass that gets
yeah.
you around like Windows AMSI.
Yeah, I think
And
that's from the amz.fail site. That looks very familiar. We played
yeah,
with this
yeah, yeah,
in our class. So, yeah, that
yeah.
rings a bell.
And then also PowerSploit, which is also obfuscated. And I
Oh,
was real worried for a minute. And then I realized that this was not an attack. There's actually a really popular endpoint detection tool. I'll have to look up and see if they're still doing it or not, but really popular that is running these things encoded in PowerShell on every endpoint that's installed on.
oh,
Now,
oh.
I don't know why. I don't know if they're testing their own detections on every endpoint.
Okay.
I have no idea. I actually sent something, either sent something to Matt or mentioned him or something, and he was well aware of it. He's like, "Yeah, they promise they're going to stop doing that or something." I thought it was very interesting.
Yeah. Is that what you saw?
So
Did you see it fire on a were you seeing it fire on a bunch of endpoints?
yeah,
See, and that would
yeah,
give me an absolute heart failure, I think.
right, yeah, because yeah, when we find something like this, we start digging deeper into that endpoint, but then we also send off a search across our entire customer base to
Yeah.
see if it's elsewhere.
Oh,
And like
sure.
as I was digging it in, like just my terminal is just going like just like hit after hit after hit after hit. I'm like, what is going on? This can't be like a worldwide attack that's happening right now. This is ridiculous.
Yeah.
So yeah, it turns out it was actually a piece of security software, which I thought was hilarious.
Oh my gosh. It's like, yeah,
Um,
thanks for the panic vendor. Yeah,
right.
appreciate it. What are you using your customer deployments as like your testing lab? Like, do we still detect that old, Matt Amzi
Oh
virus? We
yeah.
do. Okay,
Oh
good.
yeah.
Good. Just
Oh yeah.
testing it in the background for our own
Yeah.
edification.
Yeah, we look across customer logs because we do this stuff. So like this is an example on the left hand side here of actually most of these are if they're not blocked out with black boxes. All of this is stuff that we do in the lab. So
Okay.
if we know of an attack or if we know that a customer has been attacked or something, we will recreate those kind of things in the lab just to make sure
Oh, sure.
um, yeah, to make sure that we can have our logs and test against our stuff, but then also like test against everybody else for stuff. So
Yeah,
yeah,
sure.
that's always fun. Um,
Security best practices, right? Separate your
yeah,
prod and your dev test
yeah, oh
environment.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. Um, and then, yeah, this is, so I made this talk initially for RSA, and that's what I was doing all the testing for. So that's why, when you do this com spec thing, you can specify what the service name is in that command. So that's what I did. Is I made a nice little RSA
Excellent.
conference one.
Cool.
So yeah, on the left hand side with that com spec encoded command thing, you only see that a service was installed in the system, which again sometimes is nice to know, but it's not. Anytime a new software is installed, you're going to get that. Anytime you roll out a new image to something, you'll probably get that. So there's a lot of false positives that would go around if you only are triggering on services being installed.
Right.
But then on the right hand side, you see the Sysmon examples, which we already kind of went over number event ID one a couple times. So, oh yeah, there's the blown up version of that command.
Oh, yeah.
Um, but then we'll look at event ID 8, which is create remote thread detected that Sysmon gives you that regular Windows does not. And it shows that right there, based on that Sysmon configuration, that technique name is process injection. And then we see event ID 10, which is a process being accessed. So you see that DLL host, as well as, again, where it was granted access in the memory and where. So that's always nice to have that like little piece of evidence when you're looking at something like that. And
Yeah.
then, no, did I? Yeah, okay, I think that's it. So that original comspec encoded command, I, I noticed that the customer had marked it as like a legitimate attack, right? When I went back and was looking for examples, and I'm like, oh, I wonder like what it actually was. So I took that encoded command and base64 decoded it, and that's on the left hand side there. And then I noticed it's also encoded again. So I tried to like decode it twice and that didn't work. I'm like, okay, what is this? So I like looked it up and it was a gzip. It's a base64 gzip file. So I took that and there's a gzip decompress online tool that you can use. So I took that and it turned out that they were hit by Cobalt Strike because you could actually
Oh.
pull out the gzip encoded, base64 encoded after you got into it and found like this actual code in there.
Yeah.
So they actually had declared an incident and got it right away because that was one of the first things that had hit. It was like a Cobalt Strike dropper on their web server that had generated that finding. Now, the
Oh,
one interesting thing that I realized when you're making uh, slides like this is that if you are going to give this as an example, you should take a picture of the code and put it in your slides. Because there was an entire week period where I was trying to get the RSA review people to look at my slides and they couldn't because they were like, we can't open, there's something wrong with your, like, it's infected. There's something wrong with your Keynote file. I'm like, no, it's not. Like, it's fine.
yeah.
And it turns out like whatever AV they were using was either deleting the presentation or not letting them open it or something because of this Cobalt Strike code being in there.
Yes. There we go. You've learned from Sysmon and pro presentation tips as well. That is
Right.
hilarious. That makes sense though, right? I suppose if something's parsing it
Yeah.
out, right, sees that in the content, it's like,
Yeah.
whoa, we're gonna get
Like, whoa, whoa, whoa.
here. Yeah.
Yeah. Hilarious. It took a week to figure that out. So that was super funny.
Yeah. I suppose
Um,
you're like, geez, I hope this is not infected, right? Do you
I
start second guess
know.
yourself like, oh yikes,
Right.
where's this deck been? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like, I swear it's just Windows event IDs. Like,
Right.
I don't understand. Um, all right. So, and then detecting on that is Windows Event ID is 12 and 13. And really, you can just look for ComSpec. Like every
Yeah.
now and then, you can see ComSpec being used by a legitimate program, but not. I don't know that I've seen one other than in our testing and in bad stuff. So that's another good detection that you can use for in Sysmon.
Very cool. I'm gonna have to try that more on pen testing.
Yeah, yeah.
Maybe
Let me know
after.
how it turns out.
Yeah. Yeah, will do.
And then this last one is a full exchange compromise that one of our customers had. And this is a difference between that first one that we saw that um, ransomware their server and they had to pay the ransom and they had no backups and it was already internal. They had a very, very bad couple of weeks. This one, they had, I think it was 11 or 12 findings like rapid fire right next to each other. Um, and it was because of this proxy logon that was like, it's unauthenticated remote code execution for exchange, like on-prem exchange servers.
Yep.
And this is, just if you want to find out more, is on proxy logon's website. Oh yeah, so yeah, 11 related findings with the Sysmon rules, and like it says, the box is seriously pwned. DLL host has probably injected Cobalt Strike. Take it off the network now, and it could result, in full domain ransomware.
Oh yeah.
So
Yeah.
the first one we see is on its own, not terrible, not great, but not terrible. It's just a suspect. And this is a suspicious parent process of DLL host. So I think I blow this one up a little bit. Yeah, here we go. So the process PowerShell on their Exchange server created a child process of DLL hosts. And it goes into like, Windows normally starts processes in a particular order, blah, blah, blah. So this on its own, I would, maybe look into eventually. But the thing is, they got, like I said, 11 in a row.
Yeah.
So the next one that they get is another one that by itself is fine. It's a net user recon commands.
Yeah.
So somebody on the Exchange server typed net group dom domain admins, and that tells you all the domain admins that are
Yeah.
in that in that environment. Usually discovery command, again, one of those things that net group net user are Windows tools. They're admin tools, just like the NTDS util. You can use that legitimately. So again, by itself, it could be legitimate, right?
Yeah.
And then there's a blow up with that.
I remember this is like aged now, but I remember John Strand from Black Hills talking about this kind of stuff you're focusing on in a talk where it's like, vendors come up to him and is like, hey, have you seen my latest, Badoobly Doo thing that solves all the security problems? And he's always like, at the time during this talk, he'll say like, listen, if your environment, if people can't, if you don't get an alert when someone types who am I or commands like you just showed, like basic recon commands for somebody who just landed on an environment and is trying to learn about it. It's like, if you don't alert on that, I really kind of don't care what your cool
Exactly.
solution can do, because I want to catch somebody when they're just getting a little bit nosy and have kind of slid their way into my, LAN. So, yeah,
Yeah, exactly. Who
yeah,
cares about, APT, super serious hacker? A lot of people, a lot of attackers are going to run those same commands in the beginning to figure out where they're at, or at least have
yeah.
them automated, right?
Yeah, like you said, maybe not, but you want to know. I think from my perspective, if it's my network I'm defending, I want to know if somebody types that, even if it's one of my staff, right? Like just,
Mhm.
oh, where did that come from? Okay, came from you. Okay, you were just, oh, I see. Yeah, sounds good. You were checking to see if the domain admin got added. Fine, great. But if that comes in at 3 a.m. from some endpoint, yeah, I'm gonna start getting sweaty.
Yep. Yeah, for sure. And you see too, all of these are at like 9:15 at night.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, and then so this next one is a C admin share.
Yeah.
So they're trying to actually mount the C share from like the system account is trying to mount the C share, which is the admin share for Windows, in between their Exchange server and an internal server. That was
Mm,
their DC, in between their DC and the Exchange server.
sure.
And that's not good. Um,
Right.
you're not supposed to really transfer files from your public facing servers to your internal ones and have that channel open anyways. But to have those first two commands and then this one, like, then, start to panic.
Yes.
And then back to another fun PowerShell one is
Oh,
this, which is PowerShell exe,
yep.
bypassing their profiles, running hidden, and it is using the .NET web client to download something. So
Sure.
this download string, like that we see in malware too a lot.
Yeah.
So you can use a command like this to bypass any PowerShell execution policies. You can do it to just silently download and execute things, which is what they're doing in this case. Is they're running their exploit commands from this download.
Yeah.
And then the last one, which is, the most important one, is when their IIS web service, which runs Exchange, like the Outlook Web Access for Exchange, runs on IIS. So that IIS process is W3WPXE spawned PowerShell or um, or the command line, right? So at that
Yep.
point, they're pivoting processes, and now they have the IIS web service that gave them a remote shell, and that's like kind of the main thing that we saw with a lot of those proxy logon attacks is just this over and over again.
Sure.
And then detecting on that, we go back to an example. I mean, there was a whole bunch of detections in that entire thing, but for this one, it's Windows Event ID 1 or that the other 4688. And literally anytime that W3WP spawns anything like that,
Yeah.
that IIS
Yeah.
process should not be running, especially PowerShell or command line. Um,
Sure.
so yeah, so looking for stuff like that's really important.
Sweet.
Yeah, so here's kind of like a summary thing of things that you could probably do if you don't already have Sysmon. Is look into your logs and see what you're logging. Even if you don't have Sysmon already, we have it's called Blumira. It's a Windows GPO that you can import to actually turn on all of the logging that you probably need to be turned on. Like I said in the beginning, Windows doesn't really enable all the things you need, like um, account failures, right? Like if an
Yeah.
account fails to log in, if you have a whole bunch of people password spraying, you're never going to know it if you don't have certain
Yeah.
things turned on in Active Directory.
Great example. Yeah.
Sysmon allows you to plan for some attacks because you can look at even I'm big into like doing tabletop exercises, so you
Hmm.
can use tabletop exercises and try and tie back to some of those logs. And you can do that to do you can use those exercises to do the next two. So outlining processes to maybe even install Sysmon or get a sim or get some kind of um, uh, visibility into your environment, and it's just gonna make everybody happy, especially if you ever have an incident. Your incident responders are gonna love the fact that you have Sysmon on everything.
Oh, right. Just from a pure standpoint of, right, we can just hand over, we've been at least piling up all these logs. We have something to show for it. I think you demonstrated really well that if you're relying on default Windows logs, even if you have all those, gosh, it's going to be, I don't know. I haven't been in the IR directly hands to keyboard side, but I imagine it's a lot harder to make conclusive
Oh yeah,
connection to things in the IR
yeah,
world if you're just using default Windows logging. It's just not super awesome out of the box.
yeah. Sometimes almost impossible. Like if you don't have the right logging and you don't have the right retention, you're not sending it somewhere,
Yeah.
you're not going to have somebody in IR at your doorstep as soon as that compromise happened. By the time they get there, those logs are going to be either overwritten
Yeah.
or they
Oh,
may not
right.
have been generated in the first part at all.
Yeah.
And you could have an IR pro come in that's done it a million times and just be like, we don't know how they got in, but based off your environment, it might be these things. But it's much much more difficult without the visibility to know what was actually happening. They can speculate, right?
Yeah.
They can say,
Yep.
it might have been this, it could have been an endpoint, it could have been. But when you have a whole bunch of assets and you might be behind on patch management or you might have a flat network, it's really difficult to kind of piece those parts together without any clues.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And is this your install of the Blumira agent?
Yeah.
That's cool.
So this is it was prior to Blumira Agent. It also is Blumira Agent now. It's all kind of tied into one. But we noticed in the beginning, most of our customers that were coming to us, like new customers, didn't have Sysmon installed. So we started packaging it because we were having a hard time um, custom configuring Sysmon, NXLog, and everything for every individual endpoint. So, like, some
Oh,
of them
yeah.
have IIS logs, some have SQL, some have Windows Firewall logs, some are Windows Server, you know, 2003, and they don't have certain folders. So, NXLog would always break because, if one line in the config file is wrong, it just stops sending logs.
Yeah.
So we built this just out of necessity to make that process easier. And really, anybody can use this. You don't necessarily have to have Blumira to do it because it's really just downloading and installing NXLog, Sysmon, configuring them, and shipping it off to some kind of sensor.
Oh,
So as long as you have something to ingest on 514 for like on syslog, you can use this to kind of help automate the rollout of that kind of stuff.
cool. And I'm gonna drop a link in the chat here too, because we did several weeks ago, we did a little demo of using, if you don't have the dollars or you just want to beta test kind of this type of solution and play with it. That was WAZUH.
Hmm.
We showed how to get that going, and same sort of thing. Just yeah, getting Sysmon going, pointing it over. I think I see it port 514 to some collector, and at least just start vacuuming it up. And like you said, at least you're getting those logs off your local system. So if someone does come in and wipe everything, you've got ideally that historical trail, as long as was isn't also
Yeah,
compromised. Still,
right.
you're getting the logs shipped to a different place. So in an IR situation, ideally you can go, well, hey, here's what we got. Here's this bucket of logs. This should help at least a little bit.
Yeah, yep, for sure. And then, like we talked about a little bit in the beginning, here are the two different kind of configuration files you can use. They're both up on GitHub.
Okay.
And yeah, well used. People use these. Like, I mean, the Swift on security one has over 3,000 stars. So it's very, very heavily used and both of them are very, very popular. It's just use one of them. The default config isn't going to give you nearly enough. So using one of these configurations is definitely the way to go.
Fantastic.
And I just love always pointing out that you should test your sim. So we gave a
Yeah.
whole bunch of examples in these use cases, like those, you could run NTDS util, NL test, I think is another one that I've had people use. It looks for passwords and GPOs. There's a whole bunch of different things that you can do to test to see, whatever you're using and see if it works, whether it's ours or not. And honestly, one of my favorite stories is telling is like us coming up with a rep roasting one just because you're like, hey, we did this in class and noticed
Yeah.
that you guys aren't detecting on it. I'm like, oh, sweet. Like I love good ideas that come from attacks that you can actually see in the wild. So, you know, maybe your sim provider would enjoy it as much as I did. Who knows?
Well, I think you hit a chord there in that I think, like you said, yeah, test your own sim. And then if you go to them with, hey, I saw this webinar and I tested these different things and you didn't alert on any of them, you want that conversation to be one where they go, oh, well, let's learn more. Let's hop on show us what
Mhm.
tools you used and let's figure out if there's some config blind spot or whatever.
Yeah.
If they do the thing that makes me so blood red mad, which is to try to like talk you out of questioning their
Oh my
system or
gosh. Yeah.
I mean, in my opinion, if it's my network, I go, thank you so much for your time. When does our contract end? I'm just going to make a note here and I'm going to shop for somebody
Yes.
else because that's ridiculous. And I unfortunately see a lot of it from the testing we do. And yeah, it makes me mad. But
Yeah.
anyway, yeah, test your own sim, see,
And
and
you're not going to be able to test everything,
yes,
right?
right.
You can't
Don't
you
expect
can't test every attack on every endpoint. All the like nobody has a team for that. Like even big players don't have a team for that. You have to prioritize in the way that makes sense for you.
yeah,
Start with your higher profile endpoints, right? Like at some point you might have had a like a RTO like recovery time objective or just whatever ones are most important. What would keep you up at night if it got ransomware? Right, start on those
yeah,
ones.
yeah, right.
um, yeah, and just do a handful of tests a month or a quarter or whatever, just to kind of if you're doing it internally, you'll probably need to come up with your own detection creation plan. But if you have a service doing it or an application, just keeping them on their toes and making sure some of the more important ones are being caught is something that you can do proactively on the other side.
Yeah, yeah, awesome. Oh, this has been
And that's it.
super cool.
Yeah.
Anything, and I'm sorry, I wasn't watching time. I got too into
Yeah, I
this.
me
Snake
neither. Me
Dragon thing.
too. Yeah.
I didn't realize we were over the hour, so I'm sorry about that. But thank you so much for doing this, Amanda. Is there anything coming up in Blumira's world as far as whatever announcements, conferences, positions you're trying to fill? Any last minute thing you want to mention before we sign out?
Let me think. Uh,
Always
I will
looking
be
for good people. Is that
speaking.
still the? Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. Where
Yeah,
else are you speaking?
I'll be speaking on tabletop exercises at two places. One remote, which is the anti-siphon snake oil conference
Oh, I
in
recognize.
December.
That looks
hmm
cool.
And then Mission Control, which is a conference in Arlington, Virginia, that Lima Charlie is hosting.
Okay,
So I'll be doing those two, and then that's all I can remember.
okay. Well, that's
Other
awesome.
than
And
right now, I'm
yeah.
about to go back down to Spice World, um, which unfortunately has nothing to do with the Spice Girls.
Oh, okay. Well, that will be fun if you do by chance see one. Say hi.
I'll get an autograph. Yeah, I'm gonna get an autograph.
On just a quick, totally unrelated tangent to close on. Speaking of celebrities, my wife and I went to lunch yesterday, and I dropped her off at the door, went and parked, and then as I walked up to the front of this restaurant slash, they have like a curling rink, like all
Mhm.
separated by just plexiglass to the restaurant. There's this big film crew there, and they're like, "Could you just hold on a second, sir? We have to get a establishing shot." And I was like, oh, okay. So I just stood there. This big, like black Lincoln SUV thing pulls up. These three guys kind of hop out, walk to the front door, open it up, and then someone says, "Okay, cut." And the guys turn around and start walking back towards their car. And it's three of the Pawn Stars guys. They're
Oh,
in Minnesota. I guess someone that's they must have been shooting at this like event center. I guess has like a unique thing to sell. So they're shooting an establishing shot that they're driving to Minnesota. And I guess they like curled earlier in the morning and stuff. But I'm like, what a flippin' random thing on a random day in a random place, because I posted on Facebook
Right.
and everybody's like, where are you? Where is curling? And why is there, and who are those guys? And then
Pawn
as soon as I said
Stars.
who they are, they're like, oh my gosh, we've watched those guys forever. But yeah, they looked kind of tired and a little bit cold in the curling the curling rink. But anyway, that's my celebrity sighting. So hopefully at the Spice conference, maybe at the like a closing keynote, they go, here we go. Here's they rarely reunite all together, but here they are.
But here for the last time.
For the final time. Yeah.
For all you IT people.
Right. Yeah, you're the Spice World's Spice Girls biggest fans, IT people. Yeah.
Right.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Amanda. I really appreciate it. I'll just play the kind of the outro video here, and you head back to the conference, and I'll catch up with you, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Awesome. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Thanks. Take care.
All right. Yep.
You've been watching or listening to 7 Minute Security, a weekly podcast focused on pen testing, blue teaming, and building a career in security. For more episodes like this, visit 7ms.us. And for information about our consulting services, visit 7minsec.com.